Okay, here we go.
Hi.
So, Lexie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Lexie. I use they or he pronouns. I'm from Michigan and Ohio. And I made a freaking book that's underneath my computer called The Ship We Built. And it is my debut novel, but technically not my first book. But yes, first time filling a whole thing with just my words. And it's very dear to me and largely based off of my own experiences, sort of rearranged. And it's for kids, but also kind of for adults and kind of for kid adults and adult kids. And it's always blurry with age. But yeah, those are some things about me. And I have tinfoil stars on my wall.
So, welcome everybody. Thank you for showing up to this event. We're so excited to have you here. And we're so excited to have you, Lexie. Um, so, basically, we're just going to be, well, Lexie's going to be talking about their book and what it's like to be a queer and trans multimedia artist and an author and a published author. And if you in the audience have any questions that you would like to ask Lexie, feel free to leave them in the comments, and we will see if they can get answered. So, without further ado, Chase and I are going to be here asking some questions, but mostly we're just going to be focused on Lexie here. So, I'm going to put you up on the screen, and there we go.
Cool.
So, I guess the first question we wanted to ask you was, what made you want to become a writer?
It's funny because had I thought as a kid, and a kid meaning like 24 and under, I never would have thought I would have written a book with just my words or have become a writer. I often felt that my words were punishable, or I had a lot of baggage around my voice, both being in a home that was unsafe for speaking in, but also for growing up in a time where there just wasn't a lot of language for what my experiences were, both around gender sexuality, but also in terms of daily life and even the economy. It was just a really blurry time, and so I felt really detached from words, or felt that they were bigger than me, or they weren't even for me. And what changed was when I was in college. I was in and out of the hospital a lot. And in that process, I started writing letters that were sent to my body parts, because I realized in a space that was designated for healing, like a hospital, I wasn't getting better, because so much of what I was feeling was related to my mental health and physical health being a domino effect from my mental health. And so I started writing letters to my body parts. And when I got out of the hospital, I started collecting letters that other people wrote to their body parts and started making books related to that. And so my introduction to writing came from a place of feeling far away from myself. And if I had started that journey with the thought of like, I'm going to share these with everyone, or I'm going to put them in a book, I never would have wrote them. And what helped me feel brave enough to publish them to begin with was that all of these letters people were writing to their body parts were coming out together. And so there was a sense of solidarity and a sense of essentially a book of pieces, literal pieces, essays or poems, but also pieces of our bodies to create a new body of work. And so my foundation of writing comes from a place of bringing a lot of people with me. And I started writing this book, The Ship We Built, when someone that I had a crush on and who is still very dear to me in a different way challenged me to write a children's book. And so I did. But it didn't start as a novel. It started as a picture book. It started as 1 or 2 pages of notebook. And it slowly built from there. But just like my writing career as a whole, had I started with the intention of sharing with the world or creating something as long as a 280-page novel, I wouldn't have ever started. So it's happened in baby steps.
So what inspires you, Lexie, in the work that you do?
I think the version of myself that I just described, and knowing that a lot of the things that have made me feel so lonely in my life are not isolating, or they're not isolated experiences, they're isolating experiences. So I have found that, especially with the foundation of an anthology curation, that that it's so much about sharing, and it's so much about breaking out of what I have been trained to think makes me worthless, or what makes me better off, invisible, or inconvenient. So that definitely fuels me, of just knowing deep down that it's all connected, and giving to that version of myself that really bought into the belief that it was just better if I wasn't around.
I have a 2-parter type question.
Yeah.
What has been your biggest challenge, not only as an artist and a writer, but being a queer and trans author and artist?
I think the biggest challenge is just as a writer beyond any sort of identity stuff is I think taking feedback and not being attached to what certain things will look like. In particular, The Ship We Built, I feel like, is a really good example where if I had been so attached to it being a picture book, I don't know if it would have gotten published. Or if after it being a picture book, I thought maybe it's gonna be a book of poems. And then after that, I thought maybe it'll be like a series of short stories about the same characters. And then I thought maybe it's a screenplay, maybe it's an animation, maybe it's a novel. And so I think being open to what form anything can take has taken a lot of internal work, and a lot of trust in my imagination, or working beyond the timelines that I assume of other people. And and I think another big challenge for writing, especially, this is related to identity, but not necessarily, of the challenge of being in an okay enough place mentally to share vulnerable things, or to share parts of my own questioning and experiences. And of course, not all writing has to be vulnerable or come from that very specific personal place, but I think one of the things that has fueled me in writing The Ship We Built is just writing what I know only I could write, and giving people time and resources to do the same for themselves through anthologies. So, but in terms of trans specific or queer specific, Gosh, I think the biggest challenge is allowing, not necessarily for myself, but from other people, allowing and fighting for something that's like really complicated, and doesn't necessarily have a linear pathway, which is what people tend to want. But I think those people are the people who probably aren't queer or maybe aren't trans, but people who want their sort of the ideas that they already have validated.
Sorry, I'm gonna real quick share a comment from one of the viewers.
Sure. Thanks. That's nice thing to say. I'm working on taking compliments. But yeah, I think in terms of like identity, it's a lot of internal work to have to fight for something that's nuanced and human. And in the ship we built specifically, I include a narrative of sexual abuse based off my own experience. And I think the decision to include that was really tough. And I think in terms of identity, that part of my growing up around sexual abuse has in some ways made it, that's been the biggest barrier for me in terms of my voice, because when I was Rowan's age, the name of the main character in the ship we built, I stopped talking. And I would call it the no talking game. And so I have a lot of weight around my words, especially because of those experiences. So that has felt very huge and big. And I think even identifying as like a trans boy-ish, like having that kind of like has been really hard journey too, in terms of like my words and space and questions of like my value and confidence, because as someone who was abused as a child, like by men, and as adult by cis men, I've had a lot of questions about what I could become, or if I would inevitably become the people who had hurt me, and what the other options were. And that has definitely messed with my sense of everything. And I chose to put that into the book. The questions that I've personally had around how abuse in particular has shaped my ability to really embrace my gender. Yeah, permission to be messy is hard, and it's hard to be in a position where you have to explain yourself. And I think that's something that all sorts of minority groups have to do, and it's so much extra work on top of just writing a book or on top of producing any sort of art form.
So on the flip side of that, what would you say is the most rewarding thing about the work that you do?
I think the most profound thing for me has been like learning to make a living. I put that in air quotes because like I'm like, just getting by, but like I'm making a living by creating narrative and conversation around the things that have almost killed me. So that has been, I don't even know if rewarding is the right word, but it's been, I'm smiling at the ice cream truck driving by. Yeah, I don't know if rewarding is the right word for that, but it's been a real massive gift and privilege. to do that. Yeah. Ice cream, yes. I actually, when the book came out 2 days ago, and and the way that I celebrated that in quarantine is that I made my favorite ice cream flavor from growing up, because it's like an obscure-ish Midwest flavor. I don't know if you have in Illinois, but we had it in Michigan. It's called Superman ice cream. And yeah, I couldn't find a way to get it delivered or anything like that where I'm living now, so I learned to make it. And that was also very rewarding too. Yeah, I guess it's sort of like an analogy too, right? Of like, you know, the ice cream, if you can't find it, you make it. So it's like, it's the same thing with queer and trans literature too, I think.
And I'm going to share another comment from Candy.
Oh, thank you, Candy. You should write Valentines professionally.
So a lot of the kids who come to Clock Inc. are aspiring writers and artists, and I know a lot of queer people in general express themselves through writing. What is your writing process like in general? I know that you've been on some writing retreats and done some writing fellowships, I believe. So could you talk somewhat about that and about some of the other things that you do to organize your thoughts and inspire yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of things have come into my mind at the same time. The first thing I'll say is, I think one of the most valuable things for me that I actually don't really do so much anymore, but I think I should recontinue, especially now in really directly isolating time. But I used to have a journaling practice where I would just write or draw literally anything that came to mind, even if it just didn't make any sense, or if I already said it like 5 times already, or like if it yeah, wasn't connected to anything that felt real, I would just write it down. And I think whether, you know, someone journals or whether someone paints or whatever, like just having some sort of practice, daily practice, where you learn not to judge your thoughts, or where I have learned not to judge my thoughts, has been extremely helpful, because if I judge myself before I even start, then I'm not gonna tell the truth, or I'm not gonna tell what I know I need to tell. Another thing that was really helpful was for some of the earliest drafts of the ship we built, because it's from a 10-year-old perspective. I did a lot of the first drafts in gel pen and in crayon, and I held the utensil like this, because that's how I used to hold utensils. And I think even just getting into the muscle memory was really helpful for me, and even playful, because I don't, especially for something that is like buoyant and from that's essentially a gift to another version of myself. I don't want to enter it being like, this is going to be hard work, or like this is going to be like an uphill battle. Like, I wanted to find ways to make it fun, and to find ways to write without writing at times. So like, there's some of the other techniques I used was, because the book takes place in the 90s, late 90s. I spent a lot of time watching like the Kids' Choice Awards from 1997, or the movies that were important to me at that time, and watching them from the lens of my character, and taking notes based on what I feel like he would both resonate with, what he would understand, and also take notes on these movies based off of what he would use as his defense. Because he heavily leans into pop culture references because he simply just wants to belong. And of course, having certain key knowledge around pop culture can act as a defense mechanism, especially as a tween. So I love writing without writing, if that makes sense. I guess it's like the research process and making it variant. Yeah, and I think most of all, which I touched on earlier, is just trying to make it as not isolating as possible, because I feel like the myth of the author is like, it's like, go in your cabin, don't talk to anyone for 8 months, and come out with your masterpiece. And that sounds like not for me, and maybe not healthy for a lot of people. And so I wanted to find ways to just make it, to connect it with other people. So I would often like share drafts with friends, or like a lot of the earliest drafts were actually more intended as like little Valentines for like, like an ex-girlfriend, or for a friend who felt ambiguous or whatever. So yeah, I think like just having variation has been really helpful.
So
It's a
speaking of
very windy answer, but
no.
there's, yeah.
So speaking of pop culture references, we've had a very important question in the comments.
Oh, that's a really good question. Okay, so it's 3 flavors. And one of them I think is also a Michigan specific flavor that I grew up with. There's cherry, plain, just plain. I don't know, but it's dyed yellow. So the cherry is bright, bright, bright red. The plain is dyed bright, bright, bright yellow. And then the third one, the third color mixed in is bright, bright, bright blue. And it's called Blue Moon ice cream. And it tastes like, it tastes like fake fruity cereal, like Fruity Pebbles, but a little bit different. And I loved Blue Moon, especially when I was a kid, because it would turn my tongue blue, and that seemed like the most fun thing in the world.
All right, there's another comment that I'd like to share.
Thank you. And thanks for listening and spending time with me.
But I would like to ask, I know you've talked a little bit about this already, but how do your own experiences, especially with regards to the Midwest, because I know you said you grew up in the Midwest, you set the book intentionally in the Midwest. So how do those experiences influence your writing?
Oh my gosh, in real big ways. Yeah, a few things come to mind. One is that I think, and this is a generalization, of course, and is more just based off my experience, and people obviously have different experiences, but I think there's a general culture of like not messing things up, or like politeness, or this sort of like, you smile through the pain. And I think that's a big theme of the book, for sure, of and part of the reason I think Rowan chooses not to speak as a defense mechanism, because he's so afraid of saying the wrong thing, or afraid of like not being perceived as like how he's supposed to be. But I think another underbelly of that is the economics of the Midwest. Like in the book, it centers more around the fall of the copper and mining industry. And for me growing up, it was the automotive industry. and how there's just so many people I knew growing up, like, were involved in that industry, and so much pride was placed on an industry that was hurting, or experiencing severe loss and change. And people, I think especially white people, like, place a lot of their value around their jobs. Or it's the thing that, like, they had when they didn't go to college, or it's the thing that they, like, that has, like, stuck by them. Or, like, some of these places throughout the Midwest used to be, like, one of the easiest places in the world to get a job, like, for the average person who didn't have a college degree. And things have changed, and that has led to, in my experience, like, a lot of addiction issues, a lot of identity loss, and clinging to something that that isn't around in the same way. And what does that do for somebody's sense of worth and identity? And also the sort of spiral, especially for men, of, like, if they don't have the job that makes them valuable, and that kicks up addictions, how does that change household dynamics? Like, how does that change, what happens in people's homes in terms of abuse and in terms of losing control, in a world where control has been lost, or was maybe never there to begin with. And I think the third thing about the Midwest that really, like, I have been feeling pretty hard is, like, I'm really thankful in some ways for my growing up experience, even though it's extremely hard, that, like, my queer friends, I feel like we really needed each other. There was a sense of really needing each other, because there weren't that many of us, or, like, so many of us were afraid to go home. So, like, we had to find ways to stay after school, or, like, find ways to connect, like, online, or through secrets, like, secret bridges and all those things. And I feel so grateful for that, because when I went to college, ironically, I went to Oberlin College. I was born in Akron, in Ohio, and I eventually went to Oberlin College. And it's known for a lot of things, but one of the things that was really tough for me when I was there, and was, most people who went to that school were from the coast, or just had radically different contexts growing up, or in their life pre-college. And I felt really weird being one of the few people who was, like, actually from the region, at this school where most people weren't from the region. And, like, people, like, made a lot of comments about my accent, which I've learned to hide, or, like, it made me feel like no one was actually listening to me. There's a very specific brand of, like, queerness that I just felt like I didn't fit into, to the point where, like, I was 19, 20, and I actually thought to myself, like, maybe I can't be queer because I'm from here, or, like, because, like, I don't, I'm having a hard time fitting with these other people. And I think, beyond the context of the Midwest, a lot of queer people have questions around enoughness, and how that can also, there can be layers with that, with intersections of other identities, of being enough. And I think in a lot of ways, social media has made that both better and worse. But all this to say, to answer your question about the Midwest, like, that was one of the reasons I felt very strongly about setting it there, was because I feel like it led to a lot of additional questions around enoughness, especially, like, A lot of conversations I have people who like have lived in New York a long time or the Bay Area for a long time, like especially older generations, like can tend to say things like, oh, like we're in a post-gender society or we're in a post-da-da-da society, or like, you know, like we've come such a long way. And like, yes, we have, but also I really am going to push against that because most queer people I know from Michigan, not Ann Arbor, um, not Ann Arbor, Michigan, like have had addiction issues, have been in abusive environments, have wanted to die. Almost all of them have wanted to die. So like I feel like it's my responsibility as someone who like has left and come back and left and come back to like yeah, to talk about those things and to yeah, say yes, even though this takes place in the 90s, it's still relevant. It's still a part of our experiences. It's in our bodies. It's in our culture. It's in the things that we don't talk about. So, yeah, I could go off a little bit more about that, but yeah, that's
So,
that.
so we would love for you to talk a little bit more. We've got some questions a little bit more specifically about the ship we built.
Yeah.
Could you really quickly, before we ask those questions, just like summarize the book? Because you know, you've talked a bit about what it's about, but just give like a little summary.
Yeah, so basically every chapter is a letter that's attached to a balloon, and at first it's with the intention of connecting with someone who won't judge or someone who doesn't have the daily context of Rowan to decide what is believable or what is valuable. And then over the course of the school year, it shifts for him as he essentially learns to connect with someone who is where he is, and not having to reach out in the same way. It's also a lot about using imagination as a tool for survival and really sitting in the everyday moments and making room for that, because I feel like trans or queer people don't like have to do or feel extraordinary things in order to be listened to. Yeah.
What is your hope for LGBT youth as a whole, but also while being in the Midwest? What is your hope for them to get out of this book?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is like, just your stories are complicated and that they matter, and you can ask questions that you don't have answers to. That's my answer in this moment. I think my response to that question sometimes changes, but I think yeah, that's what I feel in this moment. It's just like it freaking matters.
So, who did you write this book for? I know you mentioned writing it as sort of a challenge from somebody who was very important to you. But going into the book and throughout the process, did you ever have a specific audience in mind? And like, how did that influence the process?
The very, very, very earliest drafts, yeah, like you pointed out, the audience was one other person and myself, really. In every draft, the audience has expanded, I would say. But I think ultimately the book is for for a few kinds of people, or it's a love letter / gift to a few kinds of people, and I appreciate and advocate for people who I don't list right now to also like find moments of resonance and resource in it. But definitely for people who have had big questions around masculinity specifically, queer people who struggle with enoughness, and that's of course tied to regionalism, is for no matter what gender, but I think especially boys, like cis or not, but anyone who's a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. I also think of it as a gift for like people who are just lonely and don't know how to ask for help or feel like different kinds of barriers to that. And yeah, and lastly, I think it's for people who feel the power of the absence of somebody, whether the absence is a parent who's either just gone or neglectful, or so wrapped up in their own pain that they can't see you, or the absence of a friend, especially when you're young and there's just fewer ways of explaining things. And yeah, and fewer ways of reaching out without some sort of gatekeeper or yeah.
So we were hoping you could talk a bit to some of the people, especially young people, who might also be queer or trans aspiring authors, artists, people who want to do the things that you do. So I'd like to ask, how do you think someone can express themselves through art or writing if they feel like they're not talented enough?
I resonate with that a lot. I resonate with that a lot because that was one of my big barriers. And I think I ultimately just started doing it as like a lifesaver that was just thrown at me. But I think in some ways just starting as something that's just for you or for one other person. And for me, in my case, it helped to actually start with one other person in mind, because I'm not good at doing things for myself. I'm not good at giving gifts to myself, and it's something that I want to work on. But so it really helped me to have that sort of outside accountability, or this sort of like another person in mind, because yeah, I'm working on that. But yeah, because when you start with a big audience in mind, or when I started thinking with like a big audience in mind, I got blocked by not just questions of talent, but questions of accountability for what I say, questions of whether it will make my situation better or worse to be upfront about it. So I think there's a lot of layers to that in particular. But in terms of talent, I think go with what only you can tell, like I mentioned before, because if you tell what only you can tell, then it's yours and it's the truth, and the truth is powerful and respected. And there are also some strategies for if like sitting down and writing is difficult, which it can be, especially depending on the environment that different kinds of people are quarantined in right now. One of the things that was really helpful for me for another writing project that I'm still poking at a little bit, but I started it as sort of an interview series. So I didn't start off with writing. I started off by talking directly with people who were from my life and could help stimulate certain memories or help just work through a conversation that I felt stuck on. And then I would record the conversations, transcribe them, and then only use my own words, of course, but find a way to start writing based off of something that happened in another format. And I think sometimes messing with the format can be really helpful and freeing. Yeah, but it's like we need more kinds of stories. We need to mess with the rules more now than ever. So I think just because your piece doesn't look like someone else's, like that probably means it's all the more valuable.
Definitely going off what you just said, what is a piece of advice that you would give to young LGBT youth wanting to explore more their artist side or their writer side?
I'd say what was helpful for me was starting off with something that was community-based. My first few books, the two were self-published, and the last one, called Written on the Body, was with a small publisher, but making about connecting with other people and people that had a shared experience with me was so beautiful and valuable. And I really encourage that, because I think to a certain degree, especially in the age of social media, but I think this is also just a part of being an individualistic American or whatever, is like we should have more things that hold many voices, and we should have more things that are yes, like about the I, because there's value in your experience, but also creating more collective ways to publish and share and build community amongst people who resonate with your story. And that can allow for more accountability, especially for people who might be intimidated or have questions around things like talent. And also finding some sort of collective way to either write or share or create can also spread some of the responsibility, in the sense of, like, the last anthology I made was specific to trans and non-binary survivors of domestic violence and sexual abuse. And had I stood alone on that story, I don't know if I would have been able to survive sharing it at that particular time in my life. And so doing it alongside like 40 other people was so important to me. And in some ways was the only way I would have been able to do it at that time in my life. So yeah, I guess I want to encourage people to create together, especially now, especially as people are in their own homes or in homes that aren't theirs, and it's a weird in between time where we can forget each other and forget ourselves at the same time.
Well, thank you so much for that. I'd just like to once again invite everybody who is watching, if you've got any questions or anything that you want to say to Lexie, feel free to put that in the comments. But right now, we're going to talk about some things that Lexie wants to share with everybody.
Oh, yeah. Should I talk about the activity book now, or should I read from the book now?
You can talk about the activity book if you'd like.
Okay, cool. Well, I made an activity book inspired by the other book, The Ship We Built. The activity book is full of drawing prompts and writing prompts, or just passing time prompts. I hand drew all the pages one weekend, and whether or not you read the book, it's still a nice way to, connect with yourself or others, or simply pass time. And it'll be, oh yeah, here's some example pages. And I believe in the comment section, a link will be shared as well if you would like to download it. Oh, here's a link too. Yes.
Yeah, I'm about to paste a link into the comments. So if you want to click that link and download it, that is free for anybody to download.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you fill out any of the pages, I would love to see them. So if you if you do that, and I don't know, tag me on Instagram, which I have listed in the activity book, as okay Lexie Bean. I would love to see the what the prompts made you feel and believe and try.
We also want to invite anyone to order the book online if you are interested. So I'll paste that link in the comments as well. And then if there are no more questions in the comments, I think Lexie, you wanted to finish out by reading a passage from the book.
Yeah, I can read a passage from the book. My computer is hot. I'm just studying my computer. Okay. Oh, actually, so I have a question, and either one of the hosts can respond to. Is there a certain mood or theme or time of the year you would be interested in me reading from?
Ooh, Chase just walked out. I am so sorry, but yeah,
Oh,
he's not there. So I'll do this. But I don't know, maybe something with like a hopeful message.
Okay, I got you.
This is a pretty difficult time for a lot of the people in our community.
Yes, true. Let me just find.
I'm just going to leave that link up on the screen, and I pasted a link to purchase the book in the comments as well. So if you're interested at all, it is a wonderful, beautiful book, and
thank you.
I would recommend you check it out. I'm sure you would as well, Lexie.
It's very dear to me. So I would love it if you bought it. Oh, that reminds me, I also, before I read, I made a form for if you want to buy a book, and you want to have it signed or personalized. I made a form so you can write out your name, where you want me to mail the stickers to, and then you can stick them in your book. So that will go in the comment section as well. But in the meantime, I'm going to read to you a short chapter, but it's a dear one to me. Yeah. And for those of you who are watching now, the reading portion of this event will not be posted online. It's live stream only. So whoever is listening now gets a nice treat.
And if you're watching this after the fact, I guess this is where we say goodbye. So.
Oh, right. Okay. Goodbye to those people. Thank you for being here. And I hope to send you a sticker if you'd like one.